So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is May Lacey. I'm a data scientist at Conservation Science Partners, and we're really excited to share with you all today the analysis that we've been conducting in partnership with the Living Desert Zoo and Gardens, focused on understanding how public sentiment of the Mojave Desert tortoise affects its conservation. So without further ado, I'll jump right in. Next slide, please, Maddie. So first, I want to introduce you all to our workshop facilitators and organizers. And so on the Conservation Science Partners team, we have Dr. Brett Dixon, Dr. Alyssa Olympi, myself, May Lacey, and Madeline Standen. And we've been really excited to be able to partner with Living Desert Zoo, particularly Dr. James Danoff-Burg and Katie Shaw in exploring public sentiment around the tortoise. Next slide, please. And with that, we also want to welcome you all and be able to get a brief introduction from you. And so please feel free, if you'd like, to post your name, your role, your organization in the chat if you want to connect with folks there. We also encourage you to scan this QR code or go to menti.com. It's written at the bottom of the screen here, and enter that code. We're going to do a brief poll just to get a sense of who all we have in attendance today. All right, and Maddie, I think when you're all set, we can
just wanted to give people
head to the poll.
Comment. Great.
I know, yes, thank you.
Great. All right. Should be seeing the results now.
It's great to see so many folks from federal agencies and the nonprofits. And again, you can do this from your phone or your web browser. We'll give folks just a minute or so to respond to each question. Okay, great. Looks like we definitely have some solid representation from federal agencies. Thank you all for responding. It's great to have you all here. It's so wonderful to see the spread of organizations that are represented here. Maddie, if you want to go on to the next question. As we move through the slides here, your poll should update and you should be able to view the next question and respond accordingly. So please go ahead and submit your responses to what best describes your primary role.
Go to the next one.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. It's great to see that we've got lots of program managers. And so now on this next slide, please go ahead and adjust the slider based on your agreement with the following statements. So you'll see that that slider has from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So please respond to, I am confident my tortoise outreach strategy is effective. My organization implements sufficient measurement and evaluation of outreach effectiveness, and I feel I understand how the public perceives desert tortoise conservation. So we're just going to get a sense of generally where folks fall on each of these three statements. All right, so we've got quite a spread for confidence on outreach effectiveness. It looks like a lot of us falling in the middle there, kind of neutral. pretty decent spread across the board for measurement and evaluation. And it looks like mostly middle of the road for understanding public perception of desert tortoise conservation. This is good to know. Hopefully today we can give you a bit more insight into public perceptions of the desert tortoise and maybe give you a few additional tools to potentially increase outreach strategy effectiveness. So it's good to see where folks are falling on this right now. Thanks all. And then just one more question when you're ready to advance, Maddie. So lastly, how do you think the public feels about the desert tortoise? And so you can choose between any of these options here. And again, this is the public perception of the desert tortoise. All right. Well, it's great to see that a lot of folks think that we are leaning on the more positive, supportive, concerned side of things as opposed to negative. I think that this may be a bit of a spoiler, but you'll see a bit of that come through in our analysis results as well. So that's great to see. Thank you all for responding to these questions. I would keep this in mind and also think through as you're seeing names, organizations, roles, etc., posted in the chat. If there's anyone that you haven't connected with that would like to, definitely feel free to take this opportunity to do that in the chat as well. But with that, we'll jump back into the presentation. So I think it's important that we frame this analysis with the understanding that more than half of the world's population uses social media. Next slide, Manny. Thanks. It's also critical to understand that roughly 3/4 of the world's population is connected to the internet. So there's a very large portion of our global community that is in some way, shape, or form engaging through the internet, whether that's through news, social media, other sources. Finally, 91% of Reuters Institute survey respondents did say that their primary news sources were online articles, social media, and other web-based resources. So a critical question that we are asking ourselves is how can we harness all of that information for conservation? That's such a vast database and there's so much information that is available online that it feels like a resource that can be very valuable to try and tap for conservation. One way that we can do this is through natural language processing, or NLP. And so that's a collection of computational techniques through which we can extract meaning from human-generated text. Next slide. So our goal with this analysis was to apply NLP to measure public perceptions of an imperiled species. And so the imperiled species we were focused on is one that I think everyone here knows and loves, the Mojave Desert Tortoise. So it's federally threatened, it's listed as endangered in California, and it's a long-lived species. This species faces many different threats from things like habitat loss and fragmentation, predation, disease, climate change, off-highway vehicle use, invasive species and wildfire. And some of these threats and issues can be fairly polarizing. It's important to try and figure out how the public is feeling about these threats and or how they're feeling about how we are trying to manage and mitigate those threats. And there's organizations like the Living Desert Zoo and Garden that are leaders in outreach and in behavior change in this space and trying to figure out how to be able to engage the public in support of the tortoise and change behaviors that may be adversely affecting the tortoise. And so with that, I want to hand it off to Katie, who can speak a bit to the Living Desert Zoo's work in this space.
Yeah, hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie, conservation social scientist at the Living Desert. I am glad to see you all here today. Thanks for joining. I know many of you have heard several iterations of this presentation in other meetings, so please bear with me, but did want to provide a kind of nutshell recap of the work we've been doing for folks that aren't familiar. So we've been doing this project with a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for the past two and a half years now at this point. There's three main foci that we've been working on. One is our Time to Talk Trash program, which works with restaurants to reduce the number of food subsidies that are available as part of the Raven management puzzle that many of us are working on. We work with restaurants to keep their dumpsters closed, covered, clean, to reduce those food subsidies. And we provide social norming and behavioral reinforcement through our Gold Star Awards, which I have a picture of in the top left there. Another area of focus is on engaging with OHV users. So we did a focus group. We created a bunch of new materials for outreach and education. And we've been out working with different OHV groups. We've partnered frequently with Cow for Wheel, American Stand Association, Corva, several others as well. And so doing outreach about how OHV users can help protect the desert tortoise. We also have decorated, as you can see, our own Can-Am that we have for field work and turned it into a tortoise mobile. And just go out and drive around and do outreach with OHV users. Share some stickers, spread the word. It's been really interesting to learn how many people don't know that they're recreating in desert tortoise habitat or know the relationship about leaving food out and ravens in the desert tortoise. And then our last area of focus has been doing school presentations with students around the greater Barstow region. And we've been doing pre and post surveys with those students to be able to gauge the attitude, knowledge, and behavioral intention changes that our presentations have caused. And it's been really exciting doing different activities like playing desert tortoise trivia bingo with them to see what the kids have learned from our presentations. But I'll put my email in the chat if you have any further questions or want to connect about any of this work. I'll also be at the Desert Tortoise Council Symposium talking about this a bit more. So happy to answer questions there too. So thanks all. I'll pass it back to you now.
Great. Thanks so much, Katie. So then with that wonderful background on what the Living Desert Zoo has been working on, Conservation Science Partners and the Living Desert Zoo partnered to then be able to try and answer this question of how can we measure and evaluate outreach effectiveness. And so in pursuing this question, we decided to measure sentiment, engagement, and activity in online discourse. Next slide. So our roadmap for today is basically we're going to be focusing on natural language processing. That's the big overarching type of analysis that we're doing. We will be focusing on two subsets of natural language processing, which are sentiment analysis and thematic analyses. We are also going to be focusing on the applications of social media and online news data to understand public perceptions of the tortoise and assess outreach impacts. And so this includes things like baseline sentiment analyses of the tortoise and changes in that sentiment through time, looking at thematic analyses of social media discourse, and figuring out or quantifying effectiveness of outreach events based on different characteristics of those events. So for starters, just want to frame this with an understanding of what exactly natural language processing is. And so again, like we mentioned earlier, it is this collection of computational techniques that we can use to extract meaning from human-generated text. And these are largely machine learning based. This allows us to perform a systematic analysis of sentiment and themes in online discourse. And then there are two subsets, as I mentioned, sentiment analysis and topic modeling, which are these thematic analyses. Sentiment analysis essentially classifies text according to polarity and emotion. So we're talking here about that positive, neutral, and negative sentiment. That's what we'll be focusing on. And topic modeling identifies underlying thematic structure in text. And so this essentially can take a piece of text, a string of text, and assign it to a thematic group that it thinks it most closely is related to. And so both of these modeling approaches allow us to measure public perceptions of a given topic, or a species in this case, and identify topics of discussion across a body of text. And so before we dive into the analyses themselves, I just want to introduce you all to the research questions that we've outlined. And so we sought to answer these 4 questions. What is the baseline public perception of the tortoise across online platforms? What narratives about the tortoise are most salient in social media and news articles? How does sentiment evolve before, during, and after outreach events? And then how do outreach programs affect online public sentiment and engagement? And so with that, I'll hand it over to Maddie, who's going to be walking us through the analyses that we did to try and answer each of these questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, May. All right, so before I get into the methods to answer each research question, I want to go over our data sources, which, as we've mentioned, included Twitter data, article data, and then our own acquisition of the data involving who has been doing outreach events in this space. So we collected Twitter, or currently X, but I think we're going to mostly refer to it as Twitter, data that spanned the time from March 2006 to August 2024. This data set included tweet text, unique user ID, and date at a minimum, and potentially other information for each tweet. So we pulled over 45,000 tweets, but after filtering for relevance and removing retweets and duplicate tweets, our final data set consisted of just around 19,000 tweets. We also got news article data from the Global Database of Events, Language, and Tone, or the GDELT library, spanning the same time, or spanning 2012 to 2024. This program pulled article URLs, and from those URLs, we were able to grab the full text to articles when possible. So we were able to get over 90,000 articles, article URLs. However, many of those article polls, or what we got pinged, were irrelevant. It's just, the way that it works. So our final data set actually was much reduced. It's only around 900 articles. And finally, we collected outreach event information through a survey that we sent out to 72 known or gathered contacts that we knew were potentially engaging in outreach in Q3 of 2024. And we received 27 responses to that outreach survey, with information on events spanning the time period from 2012 to 2024. So from that information, after we cleaned and collated it, we were able to identify 44 outreach events that correspond to 244 event occurrences over that time period. And in that survey, also, we asked respondents about not only the cadence or the timing of those events, but also about characteristics of the outreach events, which I'll get into a little bit later. So as May said, we performed sentiment analysis to answer these questions. So we used the Vader Valence Aware Dictionary and Sentiment Reasoner, or Vader. Vader uses its own lexicon, which you can think of as a basically dictionary that has over 6,000 words that have been assigned a sentiment score by human scorers. So for example, the word cheerleader has a positive sentiment of 0.9. Vader is context aware, which is very important because it takes into account not only the sentiment of a given word, but how that word is used in a larger body of text. And so it can understand things like typical negations, like not good, punctuation, word shaped, signal emphasis, and degree modifiers, such as very good. It also knows how to deal with slang words and emoticons and emojis and acronyms. So this is kind of a highly developed sentiment analyzer that we used that's really well suited for Twitter data. So the output of Vader, when you feed it a body of text, is the compound score that can be grouped into one of 3 sentiment categories based on its value. So negative, neutral, and positive. So when we fed all of our Twitter and article data to this sentiment analyzer, the output was each article and each tweet had a compound score as well as a categorical score. And secondly, we created a latent derelict allocation model for each of our data sets separately, so our Twitter data and our article data. LDA models identify the underlying thematic structure of a text using mixtures of words to identify topics. And so then each text can then be analyzed by that model to be assigned a single type topic based on the highest topic probability. Won't get too into that, the nitty-gritty of that, but it's actually very interesting. So before I jump into our research questions, I just want to clarify what we're measuring with the data that we can use from both our sentiment analysis and our thematic analysis of our tweet data and our article data. So our online media data was aggregated to match the cadence of our outreach data. So an important thing to note was that our outreach survey only asked about the week in which an event occurred. So we then aggregated our data to match that cadence. So for tweets, we aggregated a few metrics to analyze sentiment, engagement, and activity. Give you a second to look at this. And I just want to note that we did standardize several of these variables to account for the fact that Twitter is a growing platform. And so we know there are many additional users that are gained each year. And so to kind of reduce the bias of that and see if, these metrics are growing in the same way as actual Twitter use, we created some standardized metrics. And for our articles as well, we have metrics for sentiment and activity, not engagement. We were not able to derive any type of information regarding the number of clicks on articles, although that would be very interesting. So to answer our first question, we looked at the number of tweets and articles per sentiment category, as well as looking at trends in sentiment engagement and activity on online platforms. So when we compared the raw frequencies of articles and tweets, we found that positive sentiment was the highest frequency for both articles and tweets. So that tells us that online content with a positive sentiment is the most frequent. Most of the time, people are having a positive sentiment of the tortoise, which is great. Then when we took a look at trends over time to see if there are any discernible trends, we did find that tweet sentiment and tweets per user, so sentiment and activity, were increasing over time. However, the number of users that was adjusted for Twitter use was decreasing over time, as well as the new users. So new users represents, are we gaining new people involved in these discussions? So the key takeaway from that is that, tweet sentiment and activity are increasing, but engagement is potentially decreasing. However, we also took a look at these trends looking at the raw count data. And I think it's important to note that when we looked at the raw count data, we actually saw that the number of users engaged in conversations on Twitter was increasing over time. So that tells us that while, engagement on Twitter has increased over time, but just not at a rate equal to increases in Twitter use. When we looked at article data as well, we found increases in sentiment over time, same as Twitter, but we found a decrease in the number of articles posted over time. To answer question 2, we looked at trends in the latent derelict allocation or the topic model outputs in the online content. And we also looked at content in weeks that were outliers for sentiment, engagement, and activity. So looking at trends in topics over time, we limited our topic modeling to 7 topics because we were interested in looking at, sort of broader themes rather than very niche discussions. And this was, a number that was kind of able to be processed by viewers. So yeah, we've definitely found spikes in certain topics over time. And when I took a look at these articles to sort of pick out what was happening here, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Bundy standoff. And also in early 2013, there was a closing of a BLM Vegas rescue that caused some uproar online in the Twitter sphere. But other than that, there were kind of consistent topics over time. In terms of articles, we also were able to pick out some, years that were outliers for certain topics. And looking at those articles, the Ivanpah Solar Facility seemed to draw a lot of conversation, as well as in 2015, there was a big push to get a bunch of California monuments designated by Obama. In 2016, there was a lot of discussion about tortoises that were relocated from the 29 Palms base. And finally, in 2017, a lot of discussion regarding potential to adopt desert tortoises from the Arizona Fish and Game Commission that were trying to rehome some surrendered desert tortoise pets. When we looked at outliers, we were able to actually identify a few weeks that were outliers across multiple metrics, which kind of was really cool for us to see that you can pick out these really discernible events that are causing a lot of discourse on different platforms. So I'll highlight some of those. I know this text is rather small. So in 2012, there was a lawsuit that was initiated over the government failure to stop illegal grazing. 2013, federal budget cuts threatened a desert tortoise conservation captive breeding program. Again, the Bundy standoff comes up on here. In 2017, the full tortoise genome was discovered. In 2020, 2022, and 2023, in October, we're actually able to pick out Desert Tortoise Week, which was really cool because Desert Tortoise Week, I'm sure you all are aware, is that, growing effort through cross organizations to promote desert tortoise conservation. So I think it's really cool that we can see that in this online content. And then in January 2022, there were a lot of debates regarding the highway in the Red Cliffs Reserve. And finally, when the desert tortoise was listed as endangered in California in April 2024. So our key takeaway from that is that, both wins and losses for the desert tortoise and its conservation are detectable on Twitter and news platforms. So people are having both positive discussions and negative discussions. Question 3 is next. So how does sentiment evolve before, during, and after outreach events? So for this question, we pulled in that outreach data set from our survey, and we analyzed, our outreach survey results, as well as sentiment, engagement, and activity on Twitter in weeks with and without events. And finally, we looked at temporal cross correlations between sentiment, engagement, and activity on Twitter and events. So I'll just orient you to sort of the results from our survey. So we saw that most of the respondents were from nonprofit organizations and small organizations with under 5 staff. We also saw that attendance at most of these reported events was quite high, the majority. And then the organization size, pardon, I think I misspoke. I want to clarify that staff is the number of staff that are present at the event. So at the events, small amount of staff present was the majority. Involving organization size, sort of it was split across a few different sizes of organization. And again, these are the raw responses to our outreach survey. These are also results from our outreach survey. So, there was a lot of events that were targeting the general public, as well as youth or family-friendly events. And the event type, this is kind of important for the rest of our discussion, but most of these events had a social media campaign aspect to them. So we don't know if that was Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or something else, but they were using social media to promote their event or to share content relevant to the event. So we compared the sentiment, engagement, and activity in weeks with events and weeks without. So if a week had multiple events in it, we treated it as a binary, so event or no event. And we actually found that the sentiment, engagement, and activity the sentiment and engagement was higher in weeks with events than weeks without. Except for new users, there were actually less new users in weeks with events than weeks without. I know these bars are very close together, but our permutation test indicated that there was significant difference between these two categories, so weeks with events and weeks without. So our key takeaway from that is that sentiment, engagement, and activity on Twitter are higher in event weeks. When we looked at temporal cross correlations, we were able to detect a lasting effect of outreach. So I'm going to orient you to this graph. So this is cross correlation graph. So it tells you how these certain metrics, so in the first graph here, it's tweet sentiment, correlate with event occurrences. So that's binary occurrence. So in the moving to the right of 0, it's weeks after an event occurred. And moving to the left of 0, it's weeks before an event occurred. So what this graph tells us is that tweet sentiment is high in weeks when events occurred and the 2 weeks after and the week before. So we looked at a few other metrics in terms of their correlation with event occurrences. So we saw that standardized users were high in weeks with events, but not new users. And we also saw negative correlations in both users and new users in the weeks around 3 months prior. Finally, for tweets per user, so this is our activity metric, we saw that there was high correlation between activity and weeks prior to events, up to 3 months prior. And so our key takeaways from this cross correlation is that we see that positive sentiment remains high for 2 weeks following events, so maybe showing some lasting effect of outreach. More unique users are engaged on Twitter during event weeks. And then finally, we see that high activity in weeks leading up to events, which we were interpreting as suggesting the presence of promotional tweets or responses to promotion. That's something we're going to talk to you about in the discussion portion of this presentation, how we can disentangle, promotion from actually responses to promotion. And so to answer this final question, so how do outreach programs affect online public sentiment and engagement? We conducted some ARIMA modeling to test which aspects of the outreach events were the most effective at driving change. So we modeled these 6 different categorical aspects of the outreach events. I'm about to show you a big picture. Don't worry, I'm gonna slim it down for you. So we modeled each categorical aspect of each of these 6 characteristics of events. We found that staff presence and event attendance had no effect on outreach, had no effect on sentiment in the weeks in which those events occurred. So our response variable here is sentiment of tweets. We did find that organization type did affect the sentiment of tweets in the weeks in which those events occurred. So events that were hosted by private businesses and nonprofit organizations had a positive effect, were positively associated with tweet sentiment in those weeks. For organization size, we found that organizations that were small, that had less than 5 employees, did have a positive, also were positively associated with sentiment in the weeks in which those events occurred. For event type, we found that events that had a social media campaign, they were also positively associated with sentiment in those weeks. And finally, for target audience, this was, a little fortunate for the catch-all of other being significantly negatively associated with a sentiment, but, another category is a little bit hard to discern what that means. So summarizing all of this modeling for these different outreach aspects, our key takeaways are that events held by small or less than 5 employees, private businesses or nonprofit organizations were significantly associated with positive sentiment in those event weeks. We can't, definitively state that those events are actively affecting the sentiment, but there is a positive association. And our second key takeaway was that events with social media campaign elements are positively associated with sentiment. And so it seems that promotional tweets are both probably incorporated in that positive sentiment of those promotional tweets affecting the mean sentiment of those weeks, but they also may be affecting, responding tweets. All right. And after presenting all those results, I'm going to give it back to May to sort of help distill and, hone in on what we think our takeaways are from all of this work. So I'll head back to May.
Great. Thanks so much, Maddie. Yeah, so I'm really excited to try and synthesize all of this amazing information that Maddie just shared with us. And so I'll start with some takeaways in the context of outreach. And so first and foremost, regarding promotional strategy. So we did see higher average tweet sentiment during the week prior, week of, and 2 weeks after an event. And we did see that events with a social media component did have a significant association with positive sentiment on Twitter. And so we'll dive into a bit more details regarding these things in just a bit. Next slide. As far as outreach organization is concerned, as Maddie just mentioned, events held by private businesses and nonprofit organizations, as well as those held by small organizations, were positively associated with higher average weekly tweet sentiment during event weeks. Next slide. As far as news articles are concerned, it's important to note that these seem to use more emotional language than tweets. And so while we see a lot of folks having positive, negative, etc. sentiment in tweets, the absolute scores of those positive and negative sentiment values swing wider with news articles, right? So we might see even stronger positive or stronger negative sentiment associated with news articles. Next slide. Then the last item is simply just that one caveat to this that Maddie also hinted at is that we were unable to disentangle the relative contributions of promotional tweets versus organic tweets of individuals responding to events or that promotion. And so that presents a potential area for future research that we could explore. Next slide. So digging into each of these takeaways a bit further regarding promotional strategy, we're finding that timing matters. And so extending events into campaigns seems like a fairly strong strategy for drumming up additional engagement. And so we recommend planning a roughly 3-week communication arc where you're looking at this in terms of the week leading up to your event, you're sharing a lot of promotional material online. And then the week of your event, you're sharing event reminders and live posts during the event potentially. And then the week after the event, sharing highlights and outcomes and next steps and keeping that conversation going online. Next slide. The other takeaway as far as promotion is concerned is that social media is a critical component. And so if you're doing offline outreach, so in-person outreach somewhere, and you're not amplifying it online, you're missing a key opportunity for engagement. So we do recommend pairing your offline outreach with online amplification. So make sure that you're designing your events and your promotion with social media in mind. So think about what's shareable, whether that's getting good visuals, using relevant keywords and hashtags. We're not going to necessarily dig into how to optimize your content for the algorithms, but there are whole bodies of research that are available on how to do that as well. And so there's lots of strategy behind how you can navigate that as well. Next slide. As far as outreach organization is concerned, this finding that private businesses, nonprofits, and small organizations are having particularly positive impacts on sentiment suggests that the public may really value the idea of trust and authenticity and local relationships, and they may value that above, say, organizational scale. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Next slide. So some of our key guidance here is aiming to use personal and relatable language that's framed around local relevance. Next slide. partnering with and empowering those smaller local organizations as your messengers if you are with a larger organization. And then highlighting individual voices in your outreach. So whether that's talking to researchers, local volunteers, community members, make sure that you're pulling out and really amplifying those individual, very locally based stories. Next slide. As far as news articles are concerned, it's important to think about news and social media in a way where news is what's shaping emotion, and then social media is facilitating the spread and uptake. And so we recommend using news articles for narrative campaigns and storytelling and that deeper emotional framing of an issue you're trying to communicate on. And then you can use social media to amplify those narratives. So whether that's through repeated posts, providing event reminders, reposting things, all of that can be used to amplify that deeper message that you're trying to share through a news article, for example, or a blog. Next slide. Regarding these kind of caveats that we mentioned, our current analysis metrics may overestimate true engagement from the public. And again, that's because we could not disentangle organizational promotion from public, individual, organic engagement. And so we recommend that we should evaluate success moving forward, not only by overall sentiment and engagement, which is what we're looking at here, but then also expanding this analysis to look at how much and what types of conversation is user-driven versus organization-driven. And while we were not able to do this with the data that we had available for this analysis, we do recommend for other individuals and organizations that would like to conduct similar analyses or do something that's comparable to this to assess your own organization's outreach effectiveness. We would recommend that you direct the public on how to share your material online. Tell them to use specific hashtags, for example, so that way you know what to look for and what to track and gather metrics on that is specifically coming from the public, and you can discern that from your own organizational promotion. Next slide, please. So with that, we would love to open it up for a bit of a Q&A session. I believe we have upwards of 10 minutes available if folks want to use that time to talk through any of these items. So please feel free to ask any and all questions that you have in mind. And so I'll leave it there for now. And if we don't have any questions, we have plenty more we can share with you, but would love to talk through some of these results if anyone has any thoughts. All right, so one question we have here is that with respect to the size of organization, was it the number of employees in total or the number that were present at the outreach events? So we did examine both. So organization size was estimated based on the number of employees. And then we also did have the number of staff that were present at a given event. And so that was different. Yes, thank you, Maddie. Staff presence is truly just the number of staff that were in attendance at that particular event, not the number of staff at the organization overall. All right, so we have two other questions that just popped up. So we can start with the question from Cynthia. So I'm curious about your thoughts on the complexity of the message, the amount of info being shared, and the grade level of language used. Maddie, I don't know, do you want to take this one? And I don't know if you have any insights you want to share about how Vader is analyzing text and that context awareness, which I think might speak to this question a bit.
Yeah, no, I can definitely take a stab at that. So yes, this model, so the Vader model, as I said, can head back to that slide while I talk, but it uses this lexicon, and right, I said that's like a dictionary, so that was manually scored by people, and it's about the sentiment of, these 6,000 or some odd words. And so one actually, May and I discussed this a lot when we were doing these analyses, because for conservation specifically, there is a lot of nuance in the way that you phrase or you discuss endangered species such as the tortoise, and words such as the word endangered, may have a negative connotation, and so they lead bodies of text to have negative sentiment. But you know, the sentiment of these texts is very nuanced from the stance or the optimism of those texts. So you could be talking about the endangered species in the context of like a win for that species, like, preventing a highway from crossing Red Cliffs Reserve. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I think it's good to be thinking about the nuance of the way we're talking about conservation specifically and how that applies to NLP techniques. And it would be super cool if there, could be some lexicon developed that really can kind of handle the nuances with which you talk about like conservation and endangered species. But yeah, last thing I'll say was, I know May pointed this out, but that we did notice that articles tended to use more, had stronger, fluctuations in their sentiment over time. So I can show you this graph. So yeah, the articles fluctuated between, the min and max of -1 and +1, whereas the tweet sentiments had sort of a shorter range or smaller range that they fluctuated over. So I think the length of text does impact how your point can get across and how that is perceived by the sentiment analyzer we used. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. That was great. I do think, yeah, the length of the text definitely can add more context, add more information for the model to then perceive the emotional aspect of that, the sentiment of that. And so, yeah, that may be contributing to why we're seeing stronger swings in either direction with the articles, just because that is a more complex, rich data set of text to analyze within any single item. Great. We have a question from Tim. Please imagine a realistic campaign and discuss specific do's and don'ts for effectiveness. Tim, I think this is a great question for us to keep in mind, and we'll get into this in a bit, but we also are preparing a manuscript summarizing these results that we hope to publish and be able to share with you all. And I think this speaks to maybe a great opportunity to present a case study in that manuscript, exactly like what you're describing here. Because I feel like we could certainly apply this to a number of different campaigns or case studies, and kind of dissect or walk through what you should or shouldn't do based on the findings that we have here. I don't know, maybe we circle back around to this if we have time to try and come up with a campaign, but I would love to chat with you about this more and really think through elements of a specific campaign, and how these takeaways can be reflected in decisions you make around outreach. So I'm apologize, that's not a full answer to your question right now, but I do want to come back to it or chat about it further, because I think that this could be its own hour-long conversation. I'll keep jumping through some of these other questions. And so one quick one is, were there any other social media platforms considered or just Twitter? So we did just focus on Twitter for this. One of those reasons being that we were able to access a rich data set of tweets that lends itself quite well to these analytical methods. In fact, Vader was designed, Vader being the sentiment analysis model that we used, it was designed for tweets. And so tweets are they lend themselves well to this type of analysis, as opposed to a more, I don't know, visual platform like Instagram, for example, right? I think ultimately, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, Maddie, about what led to the decision on tweets only, but ultimately we did just focus on tweets for this analysis for those reasons.
Yeah, I think our goal was to make this sort of a workflow that could be reproduced or reused in different organizations to sort of assess their outreach impacts. And at the time that we, conceived of this analysis, actually the Twitter data was open source and very easy to access using this API. Unfortunately, it is actually much harder now to acquire Twitter data, which, that is really unfortunate. But yeah, I think to summarize you that we were trying to make a workflow that was fully open source, very easy to replicate. And so Twitter and GDAL were the two easiest methods for that.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. All right, I'll jump on to the next question. So does the data get skewed because the people most likely to have a positive response to desert tortoise are also the ones most likely to participate in the subject on Twitter? Do the people who might have a negative response just avoid related posts, or have these posts been screened out by algorithms? I think that this is a great question. And Maddie, I'll let you jump in a second because I'd be curious to get your thoughts. But I think that one thing that I'll note is that we are just pulling tweets and articles that mention the desert tortoise. So we are looking for Mojave Desert Tortoise in any of the text from those items, whether it's an article or a tweet. And there may be folks that are participating. Well, I think the people that are most likely to have a positive response to desert tortoise. There are people that are participating in that conversation that may be talking about the desert tortoise, but that they're frustrated because it's interfering with their OHV use, or because they're very pro-solar in a certain area and they're frustrated that there might be conflict with desert tortoise habitat or something like that. And so there are still very likely to be individuals that are engaging explicitly with desert tortoise in their text that is not in a pro-desert tortoise context. Maddie, I'll pass it off to you, but I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting question. And there is like so much you could do with this data set. I had thought it would be interesting to look at trends in individual users' sentiment over time and see if on average, like people are, individuals are being swayed or changing their sentiment over the course of their Twitter use lifetime. But we just did not have the time or the bandwidth to do those analyses. But I think that's a very interesting question. And yeah, I think there are a lot of sophisticated ways that you could analyze that. I will note, like I think to May's point, I did notice that there were a lot of both positive and negative like discussions that I was observing. And I think that to what I saw, like people might just be as likely to respond in a negative sense as they were in a positive sense. But I did not manually look at all of the 19,000 tweets, so I don't know.
Great. Yeah. And James, I see we have a hand up there too, if you have additional thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted from a timekeeping perspective, the webinar is to run out in just about 3 minutes from now, just so you're all for timekeeping purposes. Keep that in mind.
Thank you. And that's, yeah, perfect, because I was just thinking that we should take one more question because I think we can answer it pretty quickly, and then close us out. But the last question that I'll note here is that I saw a couple of folks ask questions related to, has this been repeated with other species? And I think that the answer is yes, in slightly different variations and flavors, right? But natural language processing is being applied in a number of contexts. We're aware of it being applied in the context of, say, wolf reintroduction, for example. So other species that are can be polarizing topics and issues. And so this is being applied elsewhere in conservation too, though, as Maddie noted, the issues around some of the nuance with conservation-based language, like how endangered could potentially be associated negatively, is something that we're really trying to think about as conservationists who are using these tools, and how and whether we need to address some of those things as this continues to be expanded in the conservation space. Anything else you want to add there, Maddie, before I close this out?
No, yeah, definitely has been applied to multiple other endangered species and, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and things like that. So yeah, definitely it's being widely used, definitely in endangered species research.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Thank you all for the questions. This is really, really wonderful. Maddie, would you mind taking us to the
Yes,
last
sure.
slide or second to last slide?
Lingering on this slide, here we go.
All
A
good.
little reminder of everything we went through.
Quick recap.
Okay. There we go.
All right.
Oh,
And
the last
so
slide here.
next slide, please. Perfect. So as we close us out, I just wanted to share some opportunities where you can dig deeper into these results if you would like. So you could join us at the Desert Tortoise Council Symposium. We'll be speaking on Friday. We'll actually be speaking in sequence with Katie and James as well. And so come see us all present in session 16 that day. And we also, like I mentioned, will be submitting this for peer review. And so if you want to be notified when this work is published, feel free to scan this QR code and share your email, or feel free to share it in the chat, and we'll be sure to share a copy when that comes out. And lastly, keep an eye on the Living Desert Zoo and Gardens event calendar to be aware of their outreach. And so last slide, Maddie, or next slide. So with that, thank you all again so much for being here and for giving us an hour of your time to walk through these results. I hope that you found some potential application to your work. Please feel free to reach out to us. All of our emails are listed here on this slide. And just thank you again.